What's the worst thing you've witnessed at a wedding? Serious. Only horrible for one person. The main hostess for the reception of about 30 guests. She carried in the 3-tier wedding cake. Rather than using a cart, she not only dropped it, but fell face first into it on the floor. First dead silence, then a few giggles, and then her emotional breakdown, like I have never seen before. She was completely devastated from both the embarrassment and ruining that special moment. We all eventually assured her that we are half drunk and don't care about the cake. The best part was that she easily collected $1,000 more in tips than she would have had that not happened. Was a wedding DJ for 7 years. Just several hundred weddings. Seen a lot of stuff. One horrible thing I've witnessed, I introduced the best man to give his speech and hand him the mic. He starts out by saying, paraphrasing because this was years ago, but pretty close to the quote I like, well, there were a lot of things that I didn't agree with in this relationship when it first started, and that I still don't agree with because it's seriously messed up and unbalanced and the dynamic is too one-sided, etc. etc. He's staring at the bride while saying this, proceeds to trail off. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to celebrate the marriage between Jack and Ingrid. So I just want to say congratulations. Best of luck to you guys. Etc. etc. Apostrophe. Everyone in the whole place was just looking around, glancing nervously at one another. Afterwards the father of the groom or bride, can't remember which one, comes up to me and says, thank you for not cutting the mic. I saw you looking at the head table and at us for direction, and when you didn't get it, you didn't act. I appreciate that, because I think it would have been even more awkward if he had just been cut off and didn't get the chance to at least come back to congratulating them. Apostrophe. Most awkward compliment I've ever received. I was a wedding butler for 2 years and have worked a little over 100 weddings, and these are some of my favorite stories. To preface this, for those that don't know what a wedding butler is, my job entailed setting up / maintaining / cleaning and taking down weddings, as well as catering to people's needs regardless of what they were, aside from food and drink. And if it was ever needed, which was a few times, I was also security. 1. The most awkward wedding I ever worked started out like any other wedding. Roughly 120 people. Nice couple. Wedding was to take place outside, and the reception was to take place in a large refurbished barn. Everything goes smoothly till it was time for the speeches. At this point in the night I usually slip away to a somewhat secluded part of the reception to eat and listen in case anything goes wrong, but still close enough that people could find me. Well, the best man comes up to give his speech, and by this point in the evening he was already pretty hammered. It starts out normal. Him talking about how he introduced the bride to the groom and they first met and whatnot. Everything seemed normal. Granted, he would go on and on about the bride at times, but hey, some people are like that, so I mostly ignored him till I hear him end his speech with how it should have been him, and how he still loves her. As soon as he said that, everyone went silent, and it got really awkward. Someone eventually ushered him off stage, and the only reason I didn't help was because I was doubled over trying not to burst out laughing. 2. Unlike the first story, the worst wedding we ever had did not start out like most weddings. It started out bad and just got steadily worse. So 4 weeks prior to the wedding, the bride apparently fell down a flight of stairs and shattered her leg to the point she needed someone to help her walk down the aisle and stand at the altar. Prior to the ceremony though, at the rehearsal dinner of the 80 people scheduled to show up, about 40 actually did, which would sort of make sense if they lived across country or overseas or something, but everyone at the wedding lived under 5 hours from the site. Add to this fact the catering company for the evening brought the wrong order and there wasn't even enough food for the people there. And to top it off, the bride and groom had hired a somewhat well-known bluegrass band to come play at the rehearsal dinner, and they never showed up. Now that's just the start of it. During the ceremony itself it hailed the entire time and ended just as the ceremony did. Now it was a rather windy and chilly day, and usually the bride and groom spend a good 1.5 hours or so taking pictures around the property because of how scenic it is, but they asked me to cut it short so they could go to the tent reception and finally relax. Well, I was driving them around on this little limo golf cart thing, and the bride and groom jump in the back and the maid of honor is there with them. But no one noticed that the bride's gown was hanging precariously close to the back wheel. So I start the cart up, throw it into reverse, make sure everyone is won and settled, and as soon as I turn around and start to drive backwards, I watch as the bride gets pulled off the cart and I ended up running over her other leg. I immediately stopped the cart, jumped off and tended to her, but before I could help her up, she shoots up and loses it at the groom and maid of honor for not helping her, and she apologized to me what happened, and I was so stunned I had no clue what to say. I'm very used to dealing with angry people at weddings, especially inebriated ones, but almost all the time they are angry at me or one of the other staff. Anyway, she calms down and I take them all to the reception that is already going downhill and fast. So while I was away, the catering company arrived and started setting up food when they realized they brought the wrong order again. And while they had enough food for everyone, the only thing to eat at the wedding was grilled cheese and dessert. Not only that, but a separate company was hired to bartend for the wedding and didn't realize the event would be taking place outside, and so they didn't bring enough water for the reception and very quickly had to start cutting people off. The reception continues. They have the speeches. The band actually showed up this time, and everything was going fine till this one guest got super wasted, and as she was carrying a full glass of red wine back to her table, she tripped and doses the bride. This abruptly ends the reception as the bride has the groom help her storm off, and everyone slowly leaves about an hour before they were supposed to end. Those are just a couple of stories of many that I have, and if you want I will write more later. I hope you all enjoy, and I'm sorry for how long they are, and if they are worded weirdly. I'm better at oral storytelling rather than written. My dad taking pictures at my brother's wedding. It doesn't sound bad, but he was getting in the way of the photographer my brother hired. Every pic he tried to take, my dad was right beside him, inching him out and pushing him out of the way. My brother and mom were both really pissed at him. I've only been to one wedding, and it was dad's cousin's wedding. My dad's uncle, the groom's father, did a toast when the groom and bride were at the altar. Is this normal? Everyone around me seemed confused, and he said, "I'm glad I made it out here today. I just want you guys to know that I have cancer and I'm going to die soon. Congrats to my son and his beautiful bride. Enjoy your time." Apostrophe. Everyone was in complete silence. It was the most awkward thing I've possibly ever witnessed. FWIW. This was in 2008 and the groom's father is still alive. I've shared this before, and in the end it turned into a story to retell. But the pastor officiating my wedding had a heart attack, and my now wife and I caught him as he fell. We have video of my wife in her wedding dress consoling the pastor's wife, who was in tears behind the podium. One of my groomsmen is an urdoc and handled the situation well, and the pastor finally came back around. He was stubborn and insisted on finishing the ceremony through the sound of sirens of the ambulance coming for him. Then my brother, best man, passed out minutes later. Apparently he had put on the wrong collared shirt and it was too tight around the neck. At least the EMTs had something to do. While the pastor finished up, my brother spun and handed the rings off to urdoc groomsman as he fell, and my wife and I just busted up laughing at that point. Bride and groom were 2 hours late to the wedding. Neither one of them has a license, but had to have a wedding out in the woods. They never thought to contact anyone and ask for a ride to their wedding. Of course they didn't pay the cell phone bill and it got shut off. Didn't matter because there was no cell reception where we were anyway. My time has come. Good friends getting married. It was a medium-sized wedding, no more than 75 people, including the bridal party and groomsmen. The bride's sister-in-law is pissed off something mighty. It was a wedding and reception by a lake, and everyone knew the venue. So we dressed accordingly, shirts and comfortable trousers, sundresses and sandals, etc. Sister-in-law is dressed like she's heading out for an evening of dinner and dancing. Sky-high heels, tight dress, rhinestones everywhere. She looks gorgeous, but it's not comfortable, and we're outside. The ceremony is sweet, except for the words fucking bugs, ducking pine needles, goddamn dirt. That's being picked up from the small, yet apparently mighty, microphone up front. Right after the ceremony, We walk over to the gazebo/picnic area where the reception will be, and the sister-in-law starts lobbing her high heels at her husband, screeching about what an awful day it is, gashes her husband's eyebrow open, while people are scrambling to get him napkins because facial wounds bleed like a methodica, and try to get him into a car to drive him to the hospital for stitches. She decides to up the ante. She says, "I can't take this anymore," and throws herself off of the dock in a dramatic swan dive. The problem is, the lake at that point was only 4 feet deep and marshy, so instead of a suicide, she just sort of bobs along in the water because everyone's more concerned with her husband's eye/face. Sister-in-law's father just turns towards the lake, tells her to get her ass out of there and cut the shit. They pile into 2 cars and drove off. It was surreal. Ex-girlfriend of the groom showed up at the wedding, uninvited and drunk. He broke up with her 10 years earlier and has not seen her in over 8 years. She was loud and saying very perverted thing about what she wanted to do to the groom. The bride steps up, goes all out, and punches the ex in the face, knocks the ex out cold. The bride, we know, is a normally calm and peaceful person. A few of us carry the ex out of the reception and drop her at her apartment about 20 minutes away. Bride told my wife that there is nothing that will ruin my wedding day. My husband and I were invited to the wedding of a military buddy of his. We were running a little late, but weren't too worried. We got onto base and headed for the main chapel. There are 3 or 4 chapels on base. When we got to the main chapel, it was apparent that there was no wedding going on. Looked at the invitation again. It just said post chapel and gave an address. So obviously, this wasn't the post chapel that the bride had intended, and I whipped out my phone to look up the address. We drove to that part of the base and found the place. It was some sort of administration building. Definitely not a chapel. We were confused. But we found a building with chaplain's office on the directory, so we figured we'd been invited to some sort of civil ceremony. The building was locked. Now thoroughly confused and late at this point. As we were wondering what we should do, we see an older gentleman in a tuxedo wandering around. He's pretty clearly in the same boat. Turns out he's the groom's father and he doesn't have any more idea what's going on than we do. After a few more minutes, a soldier arrives. He's the chaplain's assistant and he's looking for lost wedding guests, namely the groom's father. Turns out the bride put down the wrong address and the wrong chapel name on the invitation. By the time we got to the wedding, which they had delayed because the groom's dad was missing, the bride was in tears. I felt so bad for her. They finally started the wedding, and the chaplain gave an awkward sermon about being clothed in Jesus' love and lost his place several times. Finally, as the ceremony was over and the guests began to applaud, a bat fell down out of the ceiling and died. Craziest wedding I'd ever been to. The usher was handing out little pamphlets, and as he did, would let every single person know that he had just got engaged recently. My parents had a pretty disastrous wedding. I wasn't there to witness it, but my parents and the guests tell the stories all the time. The wedding was in July. They were expecting a hot, sunny day, but it ended up being a major downpour. My mother had a taxi scheduled to take her from her hotel to the church. Due to the rain, the taxi was super late. As my mother was waiting in her wedding dress, she gets hit by a car. She gets knocked to the ground, but it wasn't hard enough to break any bones, so she just walks it off. Unfortunately, her dress picked up a lot of the mud from her fall and a big chunk of lace was torn. It turns out the car that hit her was actually the taxi that was supposed to pick her up. She finally makes it to the church. My father was in tears, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, thinking that she wasn't going to show again because of the rain. About a third of the guests didn't make it. The rest of the ceremony went okay. At the reception, the hotel was understaffed due to the rain and the DJ couldn't make it again due to the rain, so the reception consisted of guests sitting around in a silent room waiting for food. A +1 soon decides that she is literally dying of hunger, so she goes up and cuts a slice of the wedding cake for herself before my parents had taken pictures with the cake or sliced it. On the positive side, later on they discovered that a restaurant in the hotel had a jukebox, so the restaurant lets them move it into the banquet hall, and they are able to pop in some quarters to get music playing. It was a disaster at the time, but now they look back at it and laugh. Edit. This was near Chicago around 40 years ago. They are no strangers to rain, so I'm assuming it was some monsoon level storms or flooding. I never thought to ask. Ooh, I got one. I went to the wedding of two good friends. Bride was neglected/abused by her mum as a child, but decides to invite her as an attempt at reconciliation. So we are at the reception part of the evening. Mum is talking to bridesmaid. And, no one knows what prompted this, says to her, well, I guess it's a good thing you can't have kids, isn't it? Bridesmaid bursts into tears. Bride grabs a knife to threaten mum. Someone stops her. Mum is bundled into car by her partner, and they disappear into the night. I went to a wedding with my boyfriend a few years ago. His friend was marrying a woman that no one liked. She was awful. During the ceremony we could all tell that the best man was uncomfortable. As soon as the ceremony ended, the best man burst into tears for about 10 minutes and had to excuse himself. You could tell he just realized that his best friend was gone forever. We tried to cheer him up and reassure him that him and the groom would still be close and that the bride wasn't too bad. Everyone present knew it was a lie and we were all just so depressed. Later, the bride came and yelled at our entire group, all of her husband's friends, because we weren't dancing enough. We weren't dancing because they had no DJ. Just a short playlist with the couple's favorite, not dance why, songs being played on repeat. I think throughout the whole night we heard playlists start and end about 5 times. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit universe.